It's an ordinary moment. Not dramatic. Not tense. Just another slice of normal life. You're asleep or scrolling or watching something familiar enough that you're barely paying attention. Outside, the streets look the same as they did yesterday. The sky hasn't changed. There are no sirens, no emergency alerts, no breaking news banners cutting into your screen. Nothing feels wrong. And that's exactly how it starts. Because the most dangerous moments in history don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with countdowns or warnings. They arrive quietly while most people are distracted, comfortable, and certain that tomorrow will look like today. Somewhere in the darkness, far from cities and civilians, a massive aircraft begins to move. There's no crowd watching. No cameras. No explanation given to the public. The engines spool up. The runway lights blur beneath it. And within minutes, a plane most people don't even know exists is climbing into the sky. This isn't a drill for civilians. This isn't disaster response. This isn't evacuation. This is preparation. Most people believe wars begin with explosions. With attacks so obvious that no one can deny what's happening. But that's not how modern wars actually begin. They begin with quiet decisions made by people who understand risk long before the rest of the world does. By the time explosions happen, the real choices are already over. When this plane takes off, it means something subtle but profound has changed. It means that someone, somewhere, has looked at intelligence reports, threat assessments, and global conditions, and decided that the ground may no longer be safe enough to guarantee survival. You don't feel that moment when it happens. You don't hear it. You don't know. Markets stay open. Flights continue landing. Social media argues about the same topics it always does. Politicians speak carefully, choosing words that sound reassuring but vague. Meanwhile, a government quietly relocates its ability to survive into the sky. That's what makes this moment terrifying. Not because war has started, but because the people with the most information believe it might. And history is clear on this point. When governments begin preparing for the unthinkable, it's because the distance between stability and disaster feels shorter than it used to. If you ever look up and see this plane, clearly, publicly, unmistakably, where it normally should not be, that doesn't mean panic is justified. It means denial no longer is. Because the moment this aircraft leaves the ground, the world has already shifted into a new phase. One where leaders are no longer planning for normal crises, but for the possibility that everything they depend on could fail. And once a system enters that phase, it rarely returns to normal without passing through something far darker first. There are tens of thousands of flights in the sky every single day. Commercial airliners, cargo planes, military aircraft, surveillance platforms. Most of them leave digital fingerprints, transponders, call signs, flight paths that anyone curious enough can track online. This plane is different. This plane is not meant to be noticed. It doesn't operate on normal schedules. It avoids public airports. Its movements are deliberately low profile. Because visibility itself carries meaning, and this aircraft carries a meaning governments don't want civilians thinking about unless they absolutely have to. The Doomsday plane is designed to exist in the background of national defense, not in public conversation. It's part of a category of planning most people never encounter: continuity of government. The assumption behind that planning is simple and horrifying, that there may come a moment when the normal structure of leadership cannot survive on the ground. That's not a scenario governments like to discuss openly, because the moment people start thinking seriously about it, trust erodes. Panic grows. Stability weakens. That's why this plane staying unseen matters. When it suddenly appears in public view, photographed, tracked, talked about, it breaks an unspoken rule. It tells observers that secrecy is no longer the top priority. That signaling has become more important than invisibility. And signaling is never accidental. When people see this plane, they don't need to know its technical specifications to understand what it represents. On a gut level, they understand that it doesn't exist for everyday problems. It exists for worst-case scenarios. That's why even rumors of its movement spread so quickly. Why speculation explodes online. Why anxiety rises faster than facts can catch up. The aircraft itself isn't frightening. What's frightening is the implication that someone believes it might be needed. Because governments don't expose symbols of last resort survival unless the psychological message itself is part of the strategy. That message is simple and cold. To adversaries it says, "You cannot remove our ability to respond." To allies it says, "Command will survive." To civilians, whether intended or not, it says, "Something has changed." This is how deterrence works in the modern world. Not through speeches or press conferences but through posture. Through quiet actions that say more than words ever could. Seeing this plane doesn't mean war is inevitable. But it does mean that decision makers are no longer assuming peace. And once that assumption disappears, the world becomes far more dangerous. Not because anyone wants conflict, but because everyone is preparing for it. Officially, this aircraft is known as the E-4B Nightwatch. That name doesn't capture what it actually represents. This plane is not built to fight. It carries no weapons meant to attack cities or engage enemy aircraft. Its purpose is far more unsettling than that. It exists to ensure that decision-making survives. Every aspect of its design reflects one assumption: that the ground may become unreliable, hostile, or completely destroyed. That cities may burn. That communication networks may fail. That leadership structures people take for granted may vanish in minutes. Inside, it's not glamorous. There are no luxury suites, no unnecessary comforts. Everything is functional, hardened, redundant. Systems layered on top of systems, designed to keep working under conditions that would disable almost any other aircraft. The plane is shielded against electromagnetic pulses, bursts of energy that can instantly destroy electronics across vast areas. An EMP doesn't just turn off lights. It wipes out modern civilization's nervous system. This aircraft is built to operate when that happens. It carries communication systems capable of reaching nuclear submarines deep beneath the ocean, missile silos buried underground, and strategic bombers already in the air. Even if traditional networks collapse, this plane can still speak to forces designed to survive the end of the world. And that's the point. If national leadership on the ground is destroyed, this aircraft becomes the center of authority. It exists to prevent decapitation, the idea that eliminating leaders would prevent retaliation. In nuclear strategy, that idea cannot be allowed to exist. Because the moment an adversary believes a first strike could end a nation's ability to respond, deterrence collapses. This plane is the physical guarantee that deterrence holds. It ensures that no matter how devastating an attack might be, someone will still be alive, still connected, still capable of issuing orders. That reality is meant to prevent war. But it also reveals how close to the edge modern civilization operates. The fact that such an aircraft exists at all is an admission that the systems supporting everyday life are fragile. That stability is not guaranteed. That survival planning must assume unimaginable outcomes. So when this plane becomes relevant, when it starts appearing in public conversations, it isn't because leaders are confident. It's because they're preparing for the possibility that confidence is no longer justified. The decision to launch this plane is not made in a moment of panic. It's made in a room full of people who are trained to stay calm while imagining the worst possible outcomes. By the time this aircraft ever begins moving, the world has already been quietly reclassified in their minds. What was once unlikely becomes possible. What was once dismissed becomes something that can no longer be ignored. This decision doesn't require proof that war is coming. It only requires the belief that waiting could be fatal. Intelligence briefings pile up. Analysts stop speaking in hypotheticals and start using phrases like window of risk and compressed timelines. Military movements that would have been unthinkable years ago are now discussed as routine. Cyber activity increases. Communications are probed. Red lines are tested, not crossed outright but leaned on just hard enough to see if they hold. This is the environment the world is in right now. Not peace, not war, but something unstable in between. When leaders order the Doomsday plane into the air, they are acknowledging that the margin for error is shrinking. That if events escalate quickly, there may not be time later to move leadership somewhere safe. And that's the key point most people miss. This plane goes up before certainty. Because once certainty arrives, it's already too late. At this stage, nothing dramatic has happened. No missiles. No public emergencies. No evacuation orders. Governments continue speaking about diplomacy, restraint, and de-escalation, because they have to. But behind closed doors, preparations are accelerating. Continuity of government plans don't activate because leaders want to scare people. They activate because leaders understand how quickly modern systems can fail once pressure reaches a critical point. History shows this pattern over and over again. Before major conflicts, governments quietly reposition leadership, secure communications, and prepare for worst-case outcomes, all while publicly projecting calm. The Doomsday plane is part of that pattern. It represents the moment when leaders stop assuming the future will behave the way the past did. And once that assumption breaks, every decision that follows becomes heavier. Because no one wants to be the person who hesitated while the system collapsed. Once the plane is airborne, the world splits in two. There's the world you live in, where routines continue, alarms don't ring, and most people have no idea anything has changed. And then there's the world above it. Inside the aircraft, time feels different. Every minute matters. Every update is weighed carefully. Voices stay controlled not because people aren't afraid, but because fear is understood as a liability. This is the phase where World War III is most likely to begin, not with intent but with misunderstanding. From the air, leaders and analysts watch the planet through data streams instead of streets. Radar returns. Satellite imagery. Signals intelligence. Patterns that most people never think about become the focus of absolute attention. Below, life goes on. People complain about traffic. Kids worry about school. News cycles rotate through the usual arguments. The disconnect is total. And that disconnect is dangerous. Because when wars start, they rarely begin with hatred. They begin when decision-makers are forced to interpret incomplete information under extreme pressure. A radar anomaly. A missile test mistaken for something else. A cyber intrusion that looks like preparation for attack. Each incident on its own might mean nothing. Together they create uncertainty. And uncertainty is the most unstable state a nuclear-armed world can be in. This is why the Doomsday plane exists during this window. Its job is not to launch war, but to ensure that if decisions must be made quickly, they are still made deliberately by a functioning chain of command, rather than through chaos or fragmentation. Ironically, the plane is meant to reduce the chance of catastrophic mistakes. But its presence also tells us something deeply unsettling. It tells us that leaders believe the system is under enough strain that those mistakes are possible. And that belief doesn't come from headlines or social media. It comes from classified information the public will never see. The world above the world is quiet, tense, and focused. No one there believes everything will be fine by default anymore. They believe it has to be managed, carefully, or it could slip out of control faster than anyone can stop it. Most people imagine World War III as something intentional. A deliberate decision made by a leader who wants destruction. That image is comforting in a strange way, because it implies control. Reality is far more frightening. The most dangerous wars in history didn't start because someone wanted them. They started because leaders were afraid of being caught unprepared. In a nuclear world, that fear is amplified beyond anything humans have ever dealt with before. During this phase, every warning system is treated as real until proven otherwise. Every ambiguity is examined as a potential threat. Because the cost of ignoring a real attack is extinction, while the cost of overreacting feels abstract. Until it isn't. Leaders don't ask, is this definitely an attack? They ask, what happens if it is and we hesitate? That question has started more wars than ideology ever has. Modern conflict compresses time. Decisions that once took days now take minutes. Sometimes seconds. And when communication systems are under stress, whether from cyber interference, electronic warfare, or simple overload, clarity disappears. This is where miscalculation thrives. A defensive move is interpreted as preparation for offense. An exercise looks like mobilization. A warning signal looks like a launch. Once leaders believe an attack might be coming, restraint becomes harder to justify than action. That's how escalation happens. The Doomsday plane exists to survive this moment. To ensure that decisions, however terrible, remain centralized and controlled rather than reactive and fragmented. But its existence also exposes a hard truth. The systems holding the world together are only as stable as the trust between the people operating them. And right now, that trust is thinner than it has been in decades. Multiple global crises are overlapping. Military forces are closer to each other than they've been in years. Communication channels are strained. Red lines are ambiguous. This is not a stable environment. And when stability erodes, accidents become more likely, not because people are reckless, but because fear shortens patience and narrows options. World War III would not begin with rage. It would begin with confusion. And by the time the confusion clears, it would already be irreversible. If the signal ever comes, it won't sound dramatic. There won't be a countdown clock. No cinematic alarms. No public announcement explaining what's about to happen. Just confirmation. Confirmation that the world has crossed from uncertainty into action. The Doomsday plane is not designed to start a war. Its purpose is far colder than that. It exists to make sure that if war happens, especially the kind that unfolds in minutes, command and control do not disappear with the first strike. That distinction matters. Because the most dangerous idea in nuclear strategy is the belief that an attack could be decisive. That a nation could be hit so hard, so fast, that it would be unable to respond. This aircraft exists to erase that belief. If ground-based leadership is destroyed, authority transfers to the air. If communication networks are severed, alternate systems activate. If chaos spreads, decisions remain centralized. That's what deterrence really is, not the threat of destruction but the certainty of response. From this aircraft, leaders can issue commands to forces designed to operate independently if needed. Submarines that may not surface for months. Bombers already in the air. Systems built on the assumption that contact may be brief, fragmented, or lost entirely. And that's why this moment is so dangerous. Because once the signal is given, the goal is no longer prevention. It's survival of command. The public wouldn't immediately understand what's happening. Information would arrive slowly, inconsistently, and incompletely. Some systems would still function. Others wouldn't. Rumors would spread faster than facts. By the time clarity arrived, events would already be moving too fast to stop. This is why the Doomsday plane is so unsettling. Not because it causes destruction, but because it only becomes truly necessary when destruction is no longer hypothetical. It exists for the moment when leaders accept that restraint may no longer be enough, and that whatever comes next must be managed, not avoided. Here's where fear and reality have to be separated carefully. Seeing this plane does not automatically mean war has begun. These aircraft do fly for training. They conduct readiness drills. They test systems, crews, and procedures precisely so they won't fail if the worst ever happens. Preparedness is not panic. In fact, preparedness is what has kept nuclear war from happening for decades. But context matters. The reason sightings of this aircraft spread so quickly today isn't because people are irrational. It's because people sense that the world feels less stable than it used to. During periods of genuine stability, no one pays attention to contingency planning. It fades into the background where it belongs. During periods of tension, the same preparations feel ominous. And right now the world is tense. Military alliances are under strain. Long-standing rules are being challenged. Arms control agreements have collapsed or weakened. Cyber operations blur the line between peace and conflict. Nuclear language has re-entered public discourse after decades of being treated as taboo. In that environment, symbols matter. When a government allows a last resort survival asset to be seen, it sends a message, whether intended or not, that readiness has become a priority. That doesn't mean leaders want war. It means they fear being unprepared if it comes. There is a critical difference. History shows that the most dangerous periods are not when war is certain, but when multiple powers believe war is possible and are all preparing at the same time. Preparation can deter, but it can also amplify fear. And fear, when shared by multiple nuclear-armed states, creates a system where mistakes become more likely. So no, seeing this plane does not mean war is inevitable. But it does mean that the assumptions people rely on for comfort are no longer as solid as they once were. And ignoring that reality doesn't make it safer. This aircraft communicates without saying a word. It tells allies that leadership continuity exists, even under the worst conditions imaginable. It tells adversaries that no strike can remove the ability to respond. It tells planners, analysts, and generals that the system still has a backbone. In nuclear strategy, that message is everything. Deterrence isn't about anger or threats. It's about certainty. Certainty that escalation will not produce advantage. Certainty that there is no winning move. The Doomsday plane embodies that certainty. It says, even if cities are destroyed, even if communication networks fail, even if chaos spreads, someone will still be in control. That idea is stabilizing. But it's also deeply unsettling. Because it forces everyone to confront a reality most people prefer not to think about. That the world is structured around preparing for outcomes we hope never occur. This plane exists because modern civilization is fragile. It depends on electricity, communication, trust, and restraint. Remove enough of those elements and stability collapses quickly. The aircraft is a reminder that governments understand this fragility better than they let on. And when they choose to make that reminder visible, it's not accidental. It's a form of signaling. A way of saying, we are ready. Not eager. Not reckless. Ready. And readiness in a tense world can either prevent disaster, or signal just how close the system is to its limits. The Doomsday plane is not the warning. It's the symptom. The real warning is the environment that makes its existence feel relevant. For decades, most people lived with the assumption that global war belonged to history books. That the systems in place were strong enough to prevent catastrophe. That progress had made certain outcomes impossible. That confidence has been eroding. Not because people are weaker or more reckless, but because the world has become more complex, more interconnected, and more fragile. Right now, governments are preparing not because they want war, but because they no longer trust that restraint alone will guarantee peace. that should matter to everyone. Wars don't begin when civilians are ready. They begin when leaders quietly conclude that the risk of doing nothing is greater than the risk of preparing. By the time the public feels that shift clearly, the most important decisions have already been made. If you ever see this plain publicly, unmistakably, it doesn't mean the end has arrived. It means the people with the most information believe the future is uncertain enough to prepare for the worst. And history tells us that when multiple powers reach that conclusion at the same time, the world enters its most dangerous phase. Not because conflict is inevitable, but because mistakes become harder to prevent. This story isn't meant to inspire fear. It's meant to inspire awareness. Because understanding how wars actually begin, quietly, indirectly, through preparation rather than explosions, is the first step toward recognizing the warning signs. And the truth is simple, even if it's uncomfortable. When survival plans move into the sky, the ground beneath us is no longer as stable as it once seemed. The question isn't whether the world can survive another major war. The question is whether we notice the signals early enough to understand just how close we may already be.